Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom to the whole house, the whole Ba'it of Yashar'al, all 12 tribes, wherever your feet are touching the soil on this most kadush, this most separated, this most set apart day, in which is not just a day, simply a day, but in fact is Yahuwah himself. And it is the day that identifies him as the Elohim of creation. And it is the day that identifies us as his covenant people. And it is the day that joins us into covenant with him. Shabbat Shalom, peace and blessings, Shalom and Barakut to you and your entire house, wherever you are, listening under the sound of the Master's voice, being proclaimed through this earthen vessel. Shabbat Shalom, peace and blessings, Shalom and Barakut to you and your entire house. Shabbat Shalom to the elder brother Yehuda. Shabbat Shalom to the younger brother Ephraim. Shabbat Shalom to the former stranger, the former foreigner, the former Gentile, who was formerly estranged from the everlasting covenant, but having received the Ruach of adoption, the Ruach HaKadosh, the Ruach of Yahushua HaMashiach, and whereby having been engrafted into the olive tree, who is Yahushua, who is Yasharal, and whereby having become privy to the same everlasting covenant and promise and inheritance that was given to Yasharal and to Yasharal alone. Shabbat Shalom to you, peace and blessings, Shalom and Barakut to you and your entire house, wherever you are across this flat plain earth, listening under the sound of the Master's voice, being proclaimed through this earthen vessel which sits before you. Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah. To those of you who are on YouTube, who will hear this message, this teaching, this proclamation later on, and perhaps this is your first time running across Yahuwah's remnant, across your timeline, and you are asking yourselves, who is or what is Yahuwah's remnant? Well, we will begin by telling you who and what we are not. We are not some church. No, we are not. We are definitely not some church. With just a cursory search of the word church, there in the etymology of the word church, you will find the word, or better yet, the name Kirke. Who is Kirke? Kirke is the Greek goddess of sorcery and wine, who is known in Greek mythology for getting men drunk and turning them into unclean things. More specifically, into turning them into abominable pigs. This word Kirke, this word sometimes pronounced Circe, is so vile and so deceptive that William Tinsdale, indeed, with just a cursory search of the name William Tinsdale, this word is so vile and so deceptive when William Tinsdale, who was the first to translate the Ba'it Kadashah of what you may know as the New Testament into the English tongue from the Greek and the Hebrew text. When he came across the word in the Hebrew, the Abayit, the word kahal, and the word ecclesia in the Greek text, he properly translated this word into assembly. For his work, the fourth beast, the Roman Catholic Kirke, tied this man to a stake, strangled him to death, and burned his body because they did not want the false power of the church disseminated amongst the people. Too late. For as long as there is breath in my body and a fire in my belly, the false power of the church has been taken away. This word, Kirke, this person, this whore, this this great whore, this harlot, Kirky, you will find her also listed in the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation. There she is called Babel the Great. There she is called the great whore. There it is said she is dressed in purple and scarlet, and that she has a cup full of abominations. There it is said that this whore, this witch, this harlot, she rides a beast. Indeed she does, because this whore, Kirky, goes by many names. She is also known as the Queen of Heaven. Yes, she is. She is known as the Queen of Heaven. She is known as Jezebel. She is known as Semiramis. And this whore and this beast that she rides is her husband Nimrod. He is the beast. But there have been 4 beasts. The first beast was Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. The second beast was the Medes and the Persians. The third beast was Greece. And the fourth beast, in which lasts to the end, is going to last to the end, is Rome. Each beast representing the beast, because each beast promulgates the beast system across the whole earth. There it is said that this whore, that this sorceress, that this witch has the whole world drunk with her wine. There, this whore, this great whore, Babel the Great, Kirky, Jezebel, the Queen of Heaven, this beast that she rides, who is ultimately Nimrod, but here represents the fourth beast. The fourth beast that will last to the end is Rome. There, it is said that both her and the beast sit on 7 hills. With just a cursory search, you will find that Rome was founded upon 7 hills. Who is Rome? Rome is the progenitor of the Kirky. Rome is the Kirky. Rome is the Circe. Rome is the great whore. Rome, the Catholic Kirky, both to her and her harlot daughters, the Protestant church. This is the great whore. This is Kirky, whom is known for turning men into unclean, abominable things, because the church, the Kirky, does not teach men to make a distinction between the clean and the unclean, and thus, in accordance with the Torah, turning them into unclean, abominable things. More specifically, making them just as abominable as the unclean thing of which they are touching. We're not some church. We're not some 501(c)(3) organization. We're not some ministry, and we're not some camp. We simply are who we are, and that is Yahuwah's remnant kahal, his remnant ecclesia, his remnant assembly, of whom in this end time season, in this muadah, disappointed season, in this the consummation of the times, we are his remnant assembly, of whom he is gathering from the 4 corners of this flat plain earth, sealing us with the seal of the living Elohim, writing his name upon our forehead, filling us with living water, filling us with his breath, whose blood courses through our veins, whose breath courses through our lungs, writing his name upon our forehead, making us his dwelling place. This remnant assembly goes by the name of Yahuwah, his covenant people, of whom he has never divorced from the covenant, he is never divorced from his everlasting covenant, contrarily to Ephraim, who was divorced from the everlasting covenant in the year 722 BCE, and who until this day remains divorced from the everlasting covenant, albeit they do not have to, but they will remain divorced from the everlasting covenant until after Yahuwah's distress. When Ephraim, who is described in Genesis chapter 48, verse 19, who will become the completeness of the nations, who is a shadow of the coat of many colors worn by his father Yahushua. He has now become every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, where we see him coming out of the great distress in Revelation, the 7th chapter. Not that Ephraim is every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, but that Ephraim is in every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. We find a shadow of this in the book of Zechariah, what you may know as Zechariah, when it says there that there is going to come a time when 10 men from every nation will grab the garment of a Yehudi man and say unto him, let us go with you, for we have heard that Yahuwah is with you. This is Ephraim. This is Ephraim, the northern 10 tribes who will come out of the great distress. Yahudah, on the other hand, was never divorced from covenant. And it is Yahudah who is his remnant people, the elder son, the elder daughter, the first to be rejoined to him. As salvation, deliverance is given to the Yahudi first and then to the Gentile. This remnant people, Yahudah, has a number as described in Revelation chapter 7 and Revelation chapter 14. And that number is 144,000 worldwide, having the seal of the living Elohim, one in every 325,000 person that you meet. This is his remnant people, the house of Yahudah, of whom he has promised in accordance with Revelation 3. If we guard his word of endurance and do not deny his name, he has promised to keep us from the hour of trial that is soon to come to try this whole earth. When death himself manifests and puts on flesh and comes to destroy just about all flesh, in which the scriptures declare, if those days are not shortened, no flesh shall remain. Both the flesh of the fowl of the air, of the fish of the sea, the great sea creatures, of the beast of the field, and of the flesh of man. If those days are not shortened, no flesh will remain. And we are even at the door, at the cusp of Yahuwah's distress. This is who we are. This is who Yahuwah's remnant is. You got the extended version, but you needed to hear it, no doubt. This is who we are. We're not some church. We're not some 5013C organization. We're not some ministry, and we're not some camp. We simply are who we are. That is Yahuwah's remnant people, of whom he is gathering from the four corners of this earth in this end time season. If your ruach has been stirred after listening to this truth, and your ruach has been stirred, then perhaps you too are Yahuwah's remnant. For his sheep hear his voice, and another voice they will not follow. Nevertheless, we want to welcome you, those of you who are on YouTube, and those of you who are live here for the first time. We want to welcome you to Yahuwah's remnant Shabbat gathering. I am Dawood ben Yahuwah, and this is my Aisha, what you may know as wife, Ashayah.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, peace and blessings, shalom and barakah to you and your entire house, wherever you are across this flat plain earth, listening under the sound of the Master's voice being proclaimed through this earthen vessel that is sitting before you. Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah, Barak Yahuwah. There is a word. There is a word for his people. There is a word for his people. There is a word for the whole house of Yahshua, both of the house of Yahudah and of the house of Ephraim, and of the stranger who would enjoin himself to us. There is a word for you. There is a word. For although the Master desires to deliver a remnant people from the hour of trial, this olive tree that you find in Romans chapter 11 of both the natural branches and the wild branches. This olive tree is open to all who would cleanse themselves from sin, who would cleanse themselves from unrighteousness, and who would attach to the olive tree, who is Yahushua HaMashiach, who would attach to it and then begin to walk as his covenant people, began to walk as Yahudim. This is an open invitation unto you. This is an open invitation unto you. But this word is for the whole house of Yahshua, and it pertains to the season that we're in. It pertains to this Muadah, which this season began perhaps almost 7 years ago, when the Master declared that this was a season of separation and preparation. And that separation and that preparation continues. He later added that this is a season of threshing floor anointing. He later added that this is a season of correction. Right during the year, the pagan calendar year of 2019, right before the festival of Sukkot, the master declared that, behold, I do a great separation. And the pagan year of 2020, perhaps right before the festival of Sukkot, he declared that, behold, I do a greater separation. Here and now, right before the feast of Pasach, Chag Pasach, right before the feast of Passover, the master has declared, behold, I do an even greater separation. I do an even greater separation. He must do this greater separation, a separation between the clean and the unclean, a separation between the righteous and the unrighteous, a separation between the living and the dead, a separation between the seed of Yahuwah and the seed of Hasatan. And in this season, as this plays out, it's playing out to where this remnant, we're talking about a remnant of 144,000 worldwide across this flat plain earth, 1 in every 325,000 person that you meet versus 7.6 billion people. He's doing an even greater separation. And in this even greater separation, the master has been proclaiming words. He's been proclaiming a consuming fire that has been thoroughly cleansing his threshing floor. He has sent one crying out in the wilderness to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children and the hearts of the children back to the fathers, lest he come with utter destruction. He has sent one crying out in the wilderness to turn your wicked hearts from lawlessness back to his righteous Torah. And in this greater separation, in this even greater separation, he has sent a shaking amongst his people. He has sent a great shaking amongst his people as that relates to the festival of Pasach, as we are at the cusp, at the door of a renewed season, as Abib is even at the door. If you follow his fixed calendar, his fixed Enochian, Hanukkah calendar, the 17th of this month is spring equinox, equal day, equal night. The 18th of this month, the month of March, is the first day of Abib. Do you understand? We are embarking upon a renewed season, one unlike any other, one in which he is no longer winking, one in which he will no longer allow the unclean to partake of that which is Kadush. And so a couple of Shabbats ago, Searching for the Ancient Path, part 113, entitled Pasach Warning, the Destroyer Comes. He gave warning that if you are unclean for the being of the dead, for the soul of the dead, meaning that you are unclean because of Shadayim, because of demonic ruakut that are in you. These are the souls of the dead. He gave us the understanding that if you do not have the breath of the Ruach HaKadosh, for Ruach means breath, it means wind, and as a body is dead without breath, without wind, that you are dead, you are defiled, because you are defiled for the being, the souls of the dead, and unclean Ruach dwell in you, which defile you. And if this is you, if you are defiled for the souls of the dead, for unclean ruakut, for demonic ruakut, then you dare not touch that which is kadush. Not this season. Not this season. And all who are listening under the sound of the master's voice being proclaimed through this earthen vessel, you no longer have an excuse. That is taken away from you. You are now responsible for what you have heard. The destroyer comes. He says there in the Torah that all who partake of that which is clean, his clean kadush offerings with uncleanness on them, then that being shall be cut off from his people. With a closer look at that word in the Hebrew, the Abarit, that word is karaf, kaf, rash, and thaw. Kaf, rash, and thaw. Rash meaning head or beginning, and thaw meaning covenant. So there, to be cut off is to be cut off from the head, to be cut off from the beginning, and cut off from covenant from him throughout eternity. He's not playing anymore. He's no longer playing. Last Shabbat, he came to us in Searching for the Ancient Path, part 114. We must receive a declaration, a certificate of divorce. We must be divorced before we can remarry, before we are able to remarry. He gave us the understanding that each of us, all of us, have spread our legs under every green tree and on every high hill. And we've lain with many souls of the dead. We've lain with many demonic ruakut. We've lain with many of them, and we've defiled ourselves. And many still have other husbands. Many still have other husbands. He gave us the understanding that Pesach is all about the renewing of the everlasting covenant. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's all about laying with a renewed husband, taking upon ourselves a renewed husband. But we cannot partake of a renewed husband until there is a divorce done with given to the old husbands that are in us. There must be a certificate of divorce issued. Deuteronomy 24 declares, if a man marries a woman and he finds a matter of uncleanness in her. Some translations declare that if he finds a matter of uncoveredness in her. Uncoveredness alludes to nakedness. Nakedness alludes to uncleanness. Nakedness is uncleanness. This is why those of us who are Torah observant, we know to cover ourselves. Where those who are not Torah observant, they walk around naked because they have nothing to convict them of sin. Nakedness is uncleanness. And thus if a man finds a matter of uncleanness in his wife or uncoveredness in her, then he is to give her a certificate of divorce, put it in her hand, and cast her away, send her away, cast her out of his house. Do you understand? And thus, before you can be made fit to partake of a renewed husband, a certificate of divorce must be issued. And the old husband, the unclean, the souls of the dead, the unclean, must be cast away, must be cast out of you, must be sent away, so that you are prepared to receive a renewed husband. If that husband in you, whether of a spirit wife or a spirit husband, if that husband in you has not been divorced and sent away, that unclean thing, if it has not been sent away from you, you are dead and you are unclean and you cannot partake of the Pesach. He's not playing this year. Do not rebel against his word. He's no longer playing. Behold, he's doing an even greater separation. Do not rebel against his word. Not this year. This is a different time, a different season, and he's no longer winking. He is no longer winking. Do not rebel against this word. This past fourth day, Searching for the Ancient Path, part 115, the Master spoke to us about taking and eating. Taking and eating. Take and eat. Take and eat. He spoke to us that the goal of the Torah is salvation. The goal of the Torah is deliverance. The goal of the Torah is Yahushua. The goal of the Torah is the living bread. The goal of the Torah is life. The Torah, which is light. The Torah is a light, and the word a lamp, and reproofs of discipline, a way of light. The Torah is a light as we look at the show table. The menorah, which represents the Torah, which represents the light of the Torah, which represents the living Torah, Yahuwah, Yahushua in flesh. It represents the Torah, and there on that table is arranged the menorah with the clear pressed oil, the oil of the anointing, which gives fuel to light the lamp. It is the fuel, it is the anointing, the oil of the anointing that gives fuel to the light of the Torah, and which lights our path, and which is supposed to lead us to the living bread. It's supposed to lead us to life. It's supposed to lead us to life eternal. If the Torah, if your keeping of the Torah has not led you to deliverance and has not led you to salvation, I would reevaluate my keeping of the Torah. Hear him. Your keeping of the Torah does not make you righteous. Do you hear him? Your keeping of the Torah does not make you righteous. The Torah, the keeping of the Torah, the eternal light, is supposed to light our path and lead us to righteousness. Yahuwah Zadakanu. Yahuwah is our righteousness. If Torah has not led you to righteousness, the Ruach of righteousness, the Ruach HaKadosh, if Torah has not led you to the living bread, if Torah has not led you to deliverance, if Torah has not led you to Yahushua HaMashiach, I would reevaluate my keeping of the Torah, because you indeed are not keeping the Torah if it has not led you to salvation. I recall the 3rd chapter of the book of Yahuwah, when Nachdeman, whom you know as Nicodemus, visited the master by night. And he spoke to him in these words. He says, Master, I know that you are a man sent from Elohim, for no one can do what you do unless they are sent from him. The master spoke to him simply in these words, Truly, truly, I say unto you, unless a man is born from above or born again, he cannot see the reign of Elohim. Nachdeman, or Nicodemus, responded to him, Master, can a man re-enter the womb and be reborn from his mother? The master answered him in this word, Are you not a teacher of Yasharal? Are you not a teacher of Yasharal? Do you not understand that Nachdeman, Nicodemus, was a keeper of the Torah? He kept Torah and was a teacher of the people. But the master responded to him, Nachdeman, do you not understand that your keeping of the Torah does not make you righteous? Your keeping of the Torah is supposed to lead you to righteousness. It's supposed to lead you to the living bread, the bread of life. It's supposed to lead you to deliverance. It's supposed to lead you, Nachdeman, to a rebirth, being born righteous. Being born of righteousness, not of flesh, not of blood, but of water and of ruach. The Torah doesn't make you righteous. The Torah is supposed to light your path and lead you to righteousness. Yahuwah's Adakanu, he is our righteousness. If Torah has not led you to righteousness, if Torah has not led you to the living bread, if Torah has not led you to the bread that come down from Shamayim, the children's bread, deliverance, salvation, the Ruach HaKadosh, our Passover lamb, Yahushua HaMashiach, you're not keeping Torah. You're not keeping Torah. You're not keeping Torah. Give them ears to hear, Master. You're not keeping Torah if Torah has not led you to righteousness, if Torah has not led you to the living bread, the bread of life eternal. This week, if you're taking notes, the title of this teaching is Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 116. Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 116. Take and eat. Take and eat. Searching for the Ancient Path, Part 116. Take and eat. Take and eat. We're talking about Pesach. Pesach is not about partaking of some roasted lamb. Pesach is about partaking of Ruach, partaking of life, partaking of the life of Yahushua, partaking of the Ruach HaKadosh, the living bread, the children bread, who alone gives life, and to partake of him who is Kadosh, who is righteous, who has no darkness at all in him. We cannot partake of him with unclean hands. We cannot partake of him with unclean hands. The Torah declares so. The Torah points to him. The Torah points to the living bread. It lights the path, to light our path to reach the living bread, the children's bread, 12 of them arranged on the table. The showbread, 12 of them, the children's bread. First to the Yehudi, then to the Gentile. First to Yehudi, then unto the Gentile. You cannot partake of him with uncleanness upon your hands. He's not winking this time. He's no longer winking. Do not rebel against his word. Do not rebel against his mouth. Do not rebel against him this time. He is no longer winking. This past fourth day, we left off at Exodus, the 16th chapter. The 16th chapter, how the master there used bread, the bread from Shamayim, which indeed was a shadow. As the master used the bread there to not only teach our ancestors how to guard the Shabbat, but he showed there that it is the light that shines, that leads to the bread, as the light of the sun came every morning to shine forth on the bread, the manna, which led to life. Yes, it did. As the manna sustained and kept our ancestors alive for 40 years in the wilderness, it kept them, and he kept them from perishing via the manna, via the bread. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. We're talking about the bread of life and what this is a shadow of. And so the sun, which is a representation of the eternal light, which is Yahushua, who is Yahuwah. It is not the eternal light, but a representation of the eternal light. Thus, Hasatan, who desires to exalt his throne above Yahuwah's, he is worshipped all over the world in every facet of society, in every pagan religion. Whether you are religious, call yourself religious or not, he is being worshipped as the sun. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And so the sun is the representation of the eternal light of the living menorah. And so when it came out and showed forth in the morning, it pointed towards the bread of life, and which gave them life and sustained them for 40 years in the wilderness. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Not only did it do that, but as they partook of the daily bread, as they partook of the daily bread daily for 6 days, they gathered it, and on the 6th day they gathered twice as much. But as they gathered the bread 6 days and partook of it 7 days, even on the Shabbat day, a double portion was gathered on the 6th day. Their partaking of the bread led them to rest, led them to the eternal rest, led them to the Shabbat, which is a shadow, a foreshadowing of entering into the master's rest. For eye has not seen, ear has not heard, nor hath the mind conceived the things that Yahuwah has prepared for those who love him. But for those who love him, he has given us a foretaste, a foreshadowing in the Shabbat that he has given us, a foreshadowing of the eternal Shabbat, the eternal rest that he has prepared for those who love him. And so the bread of life leads to life. The bread of life leads to life eternal and leads to the eternal Shabbat. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We must take and eat. We must take and eat. If we do not partake of the bread, if we do not partake of the bread of life, the living bread of the Ruach HaKadosh, who alone gives life, the only alternative is death. And thus the master declares of every sin will be forgiven men, except the rejecting of the Ruach HaKadosh, the rejecting of the living bread. You reject life, the only alternative is death. You reject the Ruach HaKadosh, you reject the living bread, you reject Yahushua HaMashiach, our Passover lamb. The only alternative is death. Indeed, without him, without the breath of life, as Ruach again means breath and wind, without him coursing through our bodies, as a body is dead without breath, you too are dead, and you are unclean, and you cannot partake of the Passover. There must be a certificate of divorce issued to your husband or wife that is dwelling in you, because indeed we have all spread our legs under every green tree and on every high hill. Line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, take and eat. Searching for the ancient path, part 116. Take and eat. Take and eat. Take and eat. Turn with us to Joshua, Yahushua, commonly called Joshua, more accurately called Yahushua. Turn with us to Yahushua, the 5th chapter. Turn with us to Yahushua, what you may know as Joshua, the 5th chapter. Joshua, Yahushua, the 5th chapter. Take and eat. Take and eat. Joshua, Yahushua, chapter 5, beginning at verse 1 and reading down to what, little one? 12. Reading down to verse 12. Joshua, Yahushua, chapter 5, beginning at verse 1, reading down to verse 12. Beginning at verse 1, hear him. Listen, read.
And it came to be when all the sovereigns of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan westward, and all the sovereigns of the Canaanites, who were by the sea, heard that Yahuwah had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Yasharal, until we had passed over, that their heart melted, and there was no ruach in them any longer, because of the children of Yasharal. At that time Yahuwah said to Yahushua, make knives of flint for yourself.
Make knives of flint for yourself. Read.
And circumcise the sons of Yasharal.
And circumcise the sons of Yasharal. Read.
Again the second time.
Again the second time. Read.
So Yahushua made knives of flint for himself.
Yes.
And circumcised the sons of Yasharal.
And circumcised the sons of Yasharal. There are 3 signs, 3 things that join us into covenant with the Master. The blood, the Shabbat day, and the circumcision join us into covenant with him. All 3 are signs, awuf, that join us into covenant with him. Read.
At the heel of foreskins.
At the heel of foreskins. Read.
And this is why Yahushua circumcised them.
And this is why Yahushua circumcised them.
All the people who came out of Mizraim.
All of the people that came out of Mizraim.
Who were males.
Who were males.
All the men of battle.
All the men of battle.
Had died in the wilderness.
Had died in the wilderness.
On the way.
On the way.
After they had came out of Mizraim.
After they had came out of the land of Mizraim. Read.
For all the people who came out had been circumcised.
For all the people who had came out had been circumcised. Read.
But all the people who were born in the wilderness on the way.
For all the people who were born in the wilderness on the way.
As they came out of Mizraim.
As they came out of Mizraim.
Had not been circumcised.
Had not been circumcised.
For the children of Yasharal walked 40 years in the wilderness.
For the children of Yasharal walked 40 years in the wilderness.
Till all the nations, the men of battle, who came out of Mizraim, were consumed.
Were consumed in accordance with the word of the Master, because they refused to go up. Read.
Because they did not obey the voice of Yahuwah.
Yes.
To whom Yahuwah swore not to show them the land which Yahuwah had sworn to their fathers that he would give us. A land flowing with milk and honey.
Yes.
And Yahushua circumcised their sons.
Yes.
Whom he had raised up in their place.
Yes.
For they were circumcised.
For they were circumcised. Read.
Because they had not been circumcised on the way.
Yes.
And it came to be when they had completed circumcising all the nations.
Yes.
That they stayed in their places in the camp till they were healed.
Yes.
And Yahuwah said to Yahushua.
Listen.
Today I have rolled away the reproach of Mizraim from you.
Today I have rolled away the shame of Mizraim from you. Read.
So the name of the place is called Gilgal.
So the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. Read.
And the children of Yasharal camped in Gilgal and performed the Passover on the 14th day of the new month at evening on the desert plain of Yaraku.
Read.
And they ate of the stored grain of the land.
And they ate of the stored grain of the land.
On the morrow.
On the morrow.
After the Passover.
After the Passover.
Unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread.
And roasted grain on the same day.
And roasted grain on the same day. Read.
And the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the stored
grain. And the manna ceased the day after they had partaken of the stored grain. Read.
Of the land.
Of the land.
And the children of Yasharal no longer had manna.
And the children of Yasharal no longer had manna.
But they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year.
But they ate the food of Canaan that year. That year. Barak Yahuwah. Let's look at this. Let's allow the Master to break this down. Here, the children of those who said that we cannot go up, that they are giants and we cannot, they have high walled cities and we cannot overcome them. They will overtake us and our children will be prey unto them. All those men perished in the wilderness, but the children of them are now grown And here, after being, hear him, sustained by the manna for 40 years, after being sustained by the bread of life for 40 years, they arrived here at the banks of the Jordan. After they had crossed the Jordan, they had crossed over the Jordan, and now they're still at the banks of the Jordan. The master here gives instruction: circumcise all these men, circumcise their foreskin, for they had not been circumcised. Their fathers had been circumcised, but they had not been circumcised. Understand, an uncircumcised man, you've heard this before, is considered to be unclean. Uncleanness is equated to nakedness. An uncircumcised man is able to pull the skin back on the penis, thus exposing the nakedness underneath. Once a uncircumcised man is circumcised and the skin heals, it grows in such a way that he can no longer expose the nakedness. He is now clothed. He is now covered. As a woman's husband must provide three things in a covenant marriage. He must provide her food, her clothing, and her marital rights. A man must cover the nakedness. He must cover the shame of his wife. Yes, he does. Yes, he does. He's in covenant with her, and he must cover her nakedness. He is commanded via the Torah to cover her nakedness, to cover her shame. And thus the circumcision is a representation of marriage, of covenant, of covering the shame. But this circumcision of the flesh, in which it has never been about a covenant of flesh, but a covenant of spirit. It goes all the way back to Adam and Kua, because this covenant is given to all mankind, male and female. He created them. But the Torah declares that there must be a sign. There must be a circumcision. There must be a mark. Thus Adam and Kua, created naked, not knowing that they were naked, until the light of the Torah, through their transgression, exposed their nakedness. And once their nakedness was exposed, and they understood and knew that they were naked, they went and hid themselves with fig leaves and covered themselves with fig leaves. The Master Yahuwah, walking in the garden through the cool of the day, called for them, although he already knew what they were, called for them. And they answered him, and he asked them, "Why are you hiding from me?" And they told him what he had done. You know the story. If you don't, go back and read it, the Genesis 3 account. Going all the way down after he had pronounced judgment upon them. "Woman, in pain shalt thou bring forth children, and your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall now rule over you." So now, woman, you went from being created a little Lord in Elohim, of ruling with Elohim, to now being ruled over by your husband, as he was created as to be the visible image of the invisible Elohim on earth. He said to man, because you have done this, you're going to work by the sweat of your brow. You're going to earn bread. You're going to till the ground and work for your bread until you go back to the dust. From dust you came, and dust you shall return. He then did something interesting. He slew 2 animals, and their blood was shed in order to renew his covenant with his firstborn, Adam and Kua. In order to renew his covenant with them, blood was shed in their place in order to renew the covenant. And he took skin, the same skin that grows over the foreskin of the penis. He took skin and covered their nakedness, showing that he had renewed the covenant and that he had covered their shame, that they indeed were his bride, male and female. He created them. This circumcision represents a circumcision not made with hands, as those skins were not made with hands. This circumcision represents the circumcision of the heart that is not made with hands. When our master, the Ruach HaKadosh, when he enters us as a man enters a woman, and whereby entering into covenant with her, when he enters us, he enters into covenant with us, and then his hands circumcise our heart. And then he brings us into the bond of covenant with him, and he covers our shame. He covers our shame. But it was the bread them partaking of the bread of life in obedience that led to covenant. Do you understand? You must partake of the bread. You must eat of him and partake of the bread to be brought into covenant with him. Because to partake of the bread is to partake of him. To partake of the living bread, the bread that came down from Shamayim, is to partake of him. It is to partake of his body. It is to partake of Ruach. It is to partake of covenant. It is to partake of marriage. It is to partake of life. And when we partake of him, he enters us and circumcises our heart and marries us and joins us into the bond of covenant with him and covers our shame. He releases us, even our memory, from being enslaved into Masraim. As each of our bodies is a Masraim in and of itself, the Son sets us free from it. He sets us free from slavery and bondage and death and sin, from the kingdom of darkness, and brings us into his marvelous light. When we partake of the bread, when the Torah, the light of Torah, leads us to the living bread. As the Torah, their obedience, the light of the Torah every morning, the morning led them to the bread, and they partook of the bread, and it led them to entering into covenant, the covenant of life with him. Not only that, but it led them to rest. Do you understand? Reading in the book of Dabarim, when it says, when our people entering into the land, that he would give us rest all around. Rest all around. Do you understand that the land of Yasharal, everything is a foreshadowing, is a shadow of the kingdom of Elohim? Do you understand? It is a shadow of it. It was supposed to operate as the kingdom of Elohim. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was supposed to operate, and had our ancestors simply followed the light of the Torah, it would have led them to Yahushua. It would have led all 12 tribes to Yahushua, to the Ruach HaKadosh, and we would have never been scattered to the four corners of the earth. It is a foreshadowing of the reign, the kingdom of Elohim. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so the bread of life led them to rest, as we read in Exodus chapter 16. Yes, it did. It led them to rest, as the bread is designed to do. And as the Torah is designed to lead us to the living bread. It is designed to lead us to life, to deliverance, to salvation, to the Ruach HaKadosh. If your keeping of Torah has not led you to righteousness, has not led you to the living bread, has not led you to the Ruach HaKadosh, to deliverance, to salvation, for it is only the Ruach HaKadosh who delivers. It is only the Ruach HaKadosh who saves. If it has not led you to Yahushua HaMashiach and you have not been delivered, you are not guarding the Torah. You are not guarding the Torah, for the Torah does not make you righteous. The Torah leads us to righteousness. Yahuwah Zadakanu. Yahuwah Zadakanu. Line upon line, precept upon precept. We're talking about Pesach, in which your dirty hands cannot partake of unless a certificate of divorce has been issued. Line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little. Take it, eat. Take and eat. Give us another precept.
Numbers 21, 4 through 9.
Numbers 21. Bamat chapter 21. The goal of the Torah is salvation. The goal of the Torah is deliverance. The goal of the Torah is to lead us to righteousness. Is to lead us to the living bread, the showbread. To lead us to the bread of life that came down from Shamayim. The goal of the Torah is to lead us to the Ruach HaKadosh, who alone gives life. The goal of the Torah is to lead us to our Passover lamb, Yahushua HaMashiach, who is Ruach. To partake of the Passover is to partake of Ruach. To partake of the unleavened bread is to partake of Ruach, the bread of life that gives life eternal and that will lead to our rest. Even now, he gives us a foreshadowing of that rest. For as the Ruach comes upon you, as Yahuwah is Shalom, he brings rest to us, and giving us a foreshadow of that eternal rest that is prepared for those who love him. But chapter 21, Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 through 9, beginning at verse 4. Come on, read.
And they departed from Mount Hor by the way of the Sea of Reeds
Read.
to go around the land of Adum.
Come on.
But the being of the people grew impatient.
Listen, but the being of the people grew impatient.
Because of the way.
Because of the way.
And the people spoke against Elohim.
And the people spoke against Elohim.
And against Masha.
And against Masha. Read.
Why have you brought us out of Mitzrayim to die in this wilderness?
Why have you brought us out of the land of bondage, of slavery, and death to die in this land of the wilderness? Come on.
For there is no food.
For there is no food.
And no water.
And no water.
And our being loaves dislike bread.
Oh, listen. Our being loaves dislike bread. Our being loaves this bread of life. They rejected the bread of life. As Stephanos speaks in Acts chapter 7, he speaks that the tent of witness was in the wilderness, and it entered into the land with Yahushua. But Dawood desired to build a house for him, but he had too much blood on his hands, and it passed to Shalama. But he says there, however, what house can we build for him? For the heaven is his throne, and the earth is his footstool. What house can we build for him? He goes on to say, you stiff neck of ear and neck and of heart. For you, just like your ancestors, you rejected the Ruach HaKadosh. You rejected the living bread. You rejected the bread of life. They're being loathed the bread of life. Hear him. Hear him. The only alternative to rejecting life is death. And thus, this is the only unforgivable sin. You reject the Ruach HaKadosh. You reject the living bread. Our Passover lamb. The only alternative is death. Read, Lawan.
And Yahuwah sent fiery serpents among the people.
And Yahuwah sent fiery serpents among the people.
And they bit the people.
And they bit the people.
And many of the people of Yasharal died.
They died. They rejected life. The only alternative is death. You reject the living bread in which the Torah leads us to. The only alternative is death. Read.
Then the people came to Masha and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against Yahuwah and against you. Pray to Yahuwah to take away the serpents from us. So Masha prayed on behalf of the people. And Yahuwah said to Masha, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. And it shall be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live.
Shall live.
So Masha made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole. And it came to be, if a serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived.
Yes. That grand old serpent called the devil. He still bites. And he is death. Do you understand? As Yahuwah is life, he is death. You reject the living bread, death is coming. Indeed, death is coming upon this earth. When death is going to manifest in flesh. And if those days are not shortened, no flesh is going to remain. Because you have rejected the living bread. You have rebelled against the voice of Elohim. And the only alternative is Yahuwah's distress, is death. And perhaps your soul will be saved as he destroys the flesh. He has been pleading with you through his servant to partake of the living bread, of which you cannot partake of with uncleanness upon you. You must partake of the living bread in order to live. And in this season, if you partake of the living bread, he will write his name upon your forehead, 144,000, and deliver you from the serpent, deliver you from death, and bring you to his Kadosh mountain, where he will give us a song that no one else can sing. Everyone who looked at the bronze serpent, Barak Yahuwah, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. I'll draw all men unto the living bread. And they that believe in me shall live, and they shall never die. They shall never die if you believe in him and partake of the living bread. For if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. You reject the living bread. You reject the Passover. You reject the bread of life. You reject the Ruach HaKadosh, the only unforgivable sin. The alternative is death. The serpent will bite you. He is death. As Yahuwah is life, he is death, and he will bite you, and you will die. You will die an eternal death. Do not harden your heart or harden your ears against the master's words. Take and eat. Take and eat of the Passover. Take and eat of the bread of life, the living bread that comes down from Shamayim. Take and eat. If you do not eat, you will die. As a body without food will die, if you do not eat, you're going to die. But you cannot partake of this food unless you're washed and unless you're cleansed and unless a certificate of divorce has been issued to your husband and your wives. Those souls of the dead that you have taken on, you cannot partake of a new husband. You cannot partake of the Passover until they have been divorced from you. The only alternative to life, to taking the living bread, is death. It's death. Come on, read.
John 3, verse 14 to 15.
John chapter 3. Yahuwah chapter 3. John chapter 3. Yahuwah chapter 3. Yahuwah chapter 3. John chapter 3. Verses 14 and 15. John, Yahuwah chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. Come on, read.
And as Moshe lifted up the serpent in the wilderness.
And as Moshe lifted up the serpent in the wilderness.
Even so the son of Adam has to be lifted up.
Even so the son of Adam has to be lifted up.
So that whoever is believing in him.
So that whoever is believing in him.
Should not perish.
Should not perish.
But possess everlasting life.
But possess everlasting life. The Torah, the light of the Torah leads to him. It leads to life. It leads to the living bread. Take and eat. Take and eat of him. Take and eat of the Ruach. You've rejected him. Many of you have rejected him up until now. You have not gone to the threshing floor. You have not cried out from the land of Egypt, from the land of Mashraim, so that your cries will reach Shamayim, and he will send deliverance unto you. A consuming fire to thoroughly cleanse the threshing floor, to separate the wheat into its barn and the chaff to be burned. The goal of the Torah is life. The goal of the Torah is salvation. The goal of the Torah is deliverance. It is the Ruach that gives life. The flesh profits nothing. He is the living bread. The showbread is him. He is the bread of life. He is the bread of life. The Torah leads to him. The light of the Torah leads to him. Torah is not your righteousness. Torah leads you to righteousness. It leads you to Yahuwah's Arakanu. It leads you to entering into covenant with him. And thus, as your husband, covering your shame, covering your nakedness, and clothing you in his righteousness, clothing you in his linen garments. Take and eat. Take and eat. But you cannot take and eat of him and partake of the Passover with uncleanness upon you. You're going to be cut off from his people. If you try to partake of him with uncleanness upon you. Take and eat. Come on, read little one.
John 6, 35 to 71.
Yahuwah chapter 6. John chapter 6. Yahuwah chapter 6. John chapter 6. Verses 35 through 71. Yahuwah chapter 6. John chapter 6. Verses 35 through 71. John chapter 6. Yahuwah chapter 6. Verses 35 through 71. We're going to speed up just a little bit because we have a little bit to cover. Verses 35 through 71. Beginning at verse 35. Come on, read.
And Yahushua said to them.
Read.
I am the bread of life.
I am the bread of life. Hold little one. I am the bread of life. He is the living bread. He is the children's bread. He is the showbread. The children's bread is salvation, is deliverance. As again, the master recalls your attention to Matthew chapter 15 and the Gentile woman with the demon-possessed daughter. And she begged the master, and the master said, it is not good to give the children's bread to the little dogs. The children's bread being salvation, being deliverance. For It is the Ruach that cast out devils, as they accused him in Matthew 12 of casting out devils by Baal-zebub. And he said, if I cast out devils by Baal-zebub, then who do your sons cast them out by? For this reason they shall be your accusers. But if I cast out devils by the Ruach of Elohim, then the reign of Elohim has come upon you. It is the Ruach HaKadosh, the spirit that brings deliverance. He is life. He is the living bread. He is the bread that comes down from Shamayim. He is what the bread in the wilderness was a shadow of. And there in the wilderness in Exodus 16, it said that they had to gather by omers. Some gathered more, some gathered less. They had to gather by omers. But he is crying out to you. A voice crying out in the wilderness saying to you that you can come and eat without limitations. There is no limit to the master. There is no limit to the ruach that you can partake in. Your cup can overflow. You're not limited to omers. Come and take and eat. You can be a glutton. Come and take and eat, but you must be clean. You must be clean. You reject him. You reject the living bread. The only alternative is the serpent, is death. Do you hear him? This is the only alternative. The only alternative is Yaakov's distress, the great tribulation, the hour of trial which is coming to destroy our flesh, to kill and steal and destroy, to kill. You must partake and eat while there's still time. The goal of the Torah is salvation, it's deliverance, it's the living bread, it's the Ruach HaKadosh. If it has not led you to salvation, you're not guarding the Torah. You're not guarding the Torah. Come on, read.
He who comes to me shall not get hungry at all.
He who comes to me shall not get hungry at all.
And he who believes in me shall not get thirsty at all.
And he who believes in me shall not get thirsty with the living water. Read.
But I said to you that you have seen me.
But I say to you that you have seen me.
And still do not believe.
And still do not believe.
All that the Father gives me shall come to me.
All that the Father gives to me.
And the one who comes to me, I shall by no means cast out.
And all that come to me, I shall by no means cast out.
Because I have come down out of the heaven.
I have come down out of the Shamayim.
Not to do my own desire.
Not to do my own desire.
But the desire of him who sent me.
But the desire of him who sent me.
This is the desire of the Father who sent me.
This is the desire of the Father who sent me.
That all he has given to me, I should not lose of it.
That all that he has given to me, that I shall not lose of it. Read.
But shall raise it in the last day.
But shall raise it in the last day. Read.
And this is the desire of him who sent me.
And this is the desire of him who sent me.
That everyone who sees the Son and believes in him.
That everyone who sees the Son and believes in him.
Should possess everlasting life.
Should possess everlasting life. 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 The bread of life. Read.
And I shall raise him up in the last day.
And I shall raise him up in the last day.
Therefore the Yahudim were grumbling against him.
Therefore the Yahudim were grumbling against him, just like many grumble against his servant. Read.
Because he said, I am the bread which came down out of heaven.
Because he said, I am the bread that came down out of Shamayim. Read.
And they said, is not this Yahushua?
Is this not Yahushua?
The son of Yahushua?
The son of Yahushua.
Whose father and mother we know?
Whose father and mother we know.
How is it then that he says, I have come down out of heaven?
How is it that he says, I come down out of Shamayim?
Then Yahushua answered and said to them.
Then Yahushua answered and said unto them, listen.
Do not grumble with one another.
Do not grumble with one another.
No one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him.
No one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them. Read.
And I shall raise him up in the last day.
And I shall raise him up in the last day.
It has been written in the prophets.
It has been written in the Nabiim.
And they shall all be taught by Yahuwah.
And they shall all be taught by Yahuwah.
Everyone then who has heard from the Father and learned.
Everyone then who has heard from the Father and learned.
Comes to me.
Comes to me.
Not that anyone has seen the Father.
Not that anyone has seen the Father.
Except he who is from Elohim.
Except he who is from Elohim. The goal of the Torah is deliverance, is salvation, is Yahushua, is the bread of life, is the Ruach HaKodesh. Come on.
He has seen the Father.
He has seen the Father.
Truly, truly, I say to you.
Truly, truly, I say unto you.
He who believes in me possesses everlasting life.
He who believes in me possesses everlasting life.
I am the bread of life.
I am the bread of life.
Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and they died.
Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and died.
This is the bread which comes down out of the heaven.
This is the bread that comes down from Shamayim.
So that anyone might eat of it and not die.
So that anyone might eat of it and not die.
I am the living bread which came down out of the heaven.
I am the living bread that came down from Shamayim.
If anyone eats of this bread, he shall live forever.
If anyone eats of this bread, he shall live forever.
And indeed, the bread that I shall give is my flesh.
Indeed, the bread that I give is my flesh,
which I shall give for the life of the world.
which I shall give for the life of the world.
The Yahudim therefore were striving with one another, saying, how is this one able to give us his flesh to eat?
How is this one able to give us his flesh to eat?
Yahushua therefore said to them,
Yahushua therefore said to them,
truly, truly, I say to you,
truly, truly, I say unto you,
unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Adam,
unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Adam,
and drink his blood,
and drink his blood,
you possess no life in yourself.
you possess no life in yourself. The serpent will kill you.
He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood,
He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood
possesses everlasting life.
possesses everlasting life.
And I shall raise him up in the last day.
And I shall raise him up in the last day.
For my flesh is truly food.
For my flesh is truly food,
And my blood is truly drink.
and my blood is truly drink.
He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood stays in me.
He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood stays in me as he is in us, and us in him, the Ruach HaKodesh, the bread of life. Read.
And I in him.
And I in him,
As the living Father sent me.
as the living Father sent me,
And I live because of the Father.
and I live because of the Father.
So he who feeds on me shall live because of me.
So that he that feeds on me shall live because of me.
This is the bread which came down out of the heaven.
This is the bread that came down out of the heaven.
Not as your fathers ate the manna and died.
Not as your father ate the manna and died.
He who eats this bread shall live forever.
He who eats this bread shall live forever.
He said this in the congregation.
He said this in the congregation,
Teaching in Kafar Nakum.
teaching in Kafar Nakum.
Therefore many of his taught ones having heard said,
Therefore, many of his taught ones having heard said, read,
this word is hard, who is able to bear it?
this word is hard, who is able to bear it? The master's words are hard, and he has spoken hard words through his servant. But he speaks hard words because he loves his children, and he desires for none to perish. He desires for all to come into repentance and to enter into everlasting life, to take and eat of the living bread that gives life, to take and eat of his flesh and drink of his blood, and to receive ruah, to receive life. He desires to pour it out freely to all who would take and eat, who would cleanse themselves, who would wash themselves, who would be rid of the wives and the husbands that inhabit them, the souls of the dead. For indeed you have laid under every green tree and on every high hill you've spread your legs, and you've whored and committed adultery against your master. You need go to him with a broken spirit and a broken and contrite heart, because you have committed whoredom against him, begging him to divorce you of the husband or wives that are in you, so that you can enter into a renewed marriage, a renewed covenant with him this coming Pesach. Perhaps even before he's pleading with you, but he will not plead with you forever. Come on, read.
But Yahushua, knowing within himself that his taught ones were grumbling about this, said to them, does this make you stumble?
Does this make you stumble?
What if you see the son of Adam going up where he was before?
What if you see the son of Adam going up where he went before?
It Ruach that gives life.
It is the Ruach that gives life. It is the Ruach that gives life. It is the Ruach that gives life. This is the bread of life that comes down from Shamayim. This is the living bread. The Torah, the goal of the Torah is salvation, deliverance. As the Gentile woman begging for the children's bread, and she humbled herself and showed belief and desperation, and the children's bread came to her house. Salvation, deliverance came to her house. This is the bread that comes down from Shamayim, the Ruach HaKadosh. It is he and he alone that gives life. This is our Pasach. This is the unleavened bread. This is the true living bread that comes down from Shamayim. This is what it means to partake of the Pasach, of which you cannot partake of unless you are clean. The original Pasach was slain to deliver our people from death. Do you understand? Egypt is a representation of death. Egypt is a representation of darkness, which represents death. Egypt is a representation of sin, which represents death. Egypt is a representation of bondage, which represents death. The blood delivered our ancestors from death. It is a foreshadowing of the blood of the Lamb, of the Ruach HaKadosh. The blood in the Abarif is Dam. Dam, D-A-M, Dam, Dalet, and Mam. Dalet is represented by a door. That's the blood upon the door. Mam is represented by water. Water is always represented by spirit, by Ruach. To partake of his blood is to partake of Ruach. To partake of his flesh, the living bread, is to partake of Ruach. It is to partake of life. Read, little one.
The flesh does not profit at all.
The flesh does not profit at all.
The words that I speak to you are Ruach and are life.
The words that I speak to you are Ruach and are life.
But there are some of you who do not believe.
But there are some of you who do not believe.
For Yahushua knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe.
For Yahushua knew from the very beginning who they were who did not believe.
And who would deliver him up.
And who would deliver him up.
And he said, because of this I have said to you, that no one is able to come to me unless it has been given to him by my Father.
Unless it has been given to him by my Father. Your following of the Torah, if it doesn't lead to salvation, perhaps you're not called by the Father. Read.
From then on, many of his taught ones withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. Yahushua therefore said to the 12, do you also wish to go away?
Do you also wish to go away?
Then Shimon Kapha answered him, Master, to whom shall we go?
To whom shall we go?
You possess words of everlasting life.
You possess words of everlasting life.
And we have believed and we know that you are the Mashiach.
And we have believed and we know that you are the Mashiach.
The Son of the living Elohim.
The Son of the living Elohim.
Yahushua answered them.
Yahushua answered them.
Have I not chosen you?
Have I not chosen you?
The 12?
The 12.
And one of you is a devil.
You can stop there. Yet one of you is a devil. The goal of the Torah is salvation, is deliverance. The light of the Torah, which we read in the Torah, shines light on the table. It shines light on the bread. The Torah, the light of Torah, the living menorah, Yahuwah, who is the living menorah, the eternal light. He leads us back to him. He leads us back to life. He leads us back to the living bread, the bread of life, his breath, his ruach, life eternal. As he cannot die, if his breath is in us, then we cannot die. We will never die. In the words of the Master, we will never die if his breath is in us, which is eternal. We will never die. And the serpent, he cannot bite us and kill us. Death cannot bite us. Oh, death, where's your sting? Oh, grave, where's thy victory? Do you understand? Do you understand? He is the living bread, the bread that came down from Shamayim, and we must partake of him in order to sustain us, in order to live. The Torah leads us to him. The only other alternative is death and the serpent. that stings and kills, the sting of death. And the sting of death is coming soon. In Yahuwah's distress, where just about all flesh is going to die. And if those days are not short, no flesh is going to remain. But for a remnant who hear his words, 144,000 worldwide across this flat plain earth, who are hearing and who are hungering and thirsting and are partaking of the bread, and whereby having him write his name upon our foreheads, to seal us and to protect and keep us from the hour of trial that is soon to come upon the earth, to redeem us as first fruits from the earth, and to bring us to his Kadosh mountain and give us a song that no one else can sing. He desires to deliver us from death. He desires to deliver us from the hour of trial. But you must take and eat. You must take and eat. This Passover is like none other. None other. This Pesach is like none other. And you must take and eat. But you cannot take and eat with uncleanness upon you. You eat with uncleanness upon you, then you are killing yourselves. Karaf, destroyed, eternally cut off. You go to the threshing floor, and like our Father Yahuwah, you wrestle with him. All night if it need be, you wrestle with him, and you refuse to let him go until deliverance comes to your house. You refuse to let him go until he blesses you. Eternal life is on the line. The great distress is even at the door. Death is coming. Who is Hasatan? He is going to manifest in flesh and have the power of death in his hand. Take and eat. Take and eat and take on life. Do not reject the Ruach HaKadosh. The only alternative is death. Give us another precept, little one.
Exodus 12, 43 to 46.
Exodus 12. Exodus 12. Verses 43 to 46. Exodus 12. Shamut chapter 12. Verses 43 to 46. Shamut, Exodus 12. Verses 43 to 46. Shamut, Exodus 12. Verses 43 to 46. Cleanse yourselves. Be cleansed. Be cleansed. Let him issue a certificate of divorce of those ruku that dwell in you. Let him deliver you from bondage. Let him deliver you from Egypt, so that you can partake of him. So that you can partake of him in a renewed marriage, a renewed covenant. Allow him to come in and circumcise your heart and cover your shame, cover your nakedness, and remove the shame of Egypt, the shame of Mashrayim from you. Invite him in for your own private Gilgal moment, so that you can declare that night, that day, that evening, whatever, a place of Gilgal, and have your shame and your degradation removed from you and cast into the sea of forgiveness, never to be remembered no more. Shamut, Exodus chapter 12, verses 43 through 46. Beginning at verse 43, read, little one.
And Yahushua said to Moshe and Aharon.
And Yahuwah said to Moshe and Aharon.
This is the law of the Pesach.
This, hear him, this is the law of the Pesach. Read.
No son of a stranger is to eat of it.
No son of a stranger is to eat of it.
But any servant a man has brought or bought for silver, when you have circumcised him.
When you have circumcised him, when he has entered into covenant, the master covered this in part 113. The circumcision of the heart, when he enters into covenant with you and brings you into the bond of covenant and becomes your husband, it is for you. And it is for those who have been cleansed and who have been prepared to partake of him. Read.
Then let him eat of it.
Then let him eat of it.
A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it.
A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it.
It is eaten in one house.
It is eaten in one house.
You are not to take any of the flesh outside the house.
You are not to take any of the flesh outside of the house. This is for the house of Yasharal and the house of Yasharal alone. But Yasharal is a representation of mankind, of the remnant of mankind. Thus we are known as his firstborn. His firstborn, which being a representation of Adam, his firstborn. Deliverance, salvation is available to all men, to all mankind, if you would keep his instructions, if you would guard his ways, if you would wash and cleanse yourselves and receive the circumcision, the sign of the covenant. Read.
Nor are you to break any bone of it.
Listen, nor are you to break any bone of it. Read.
That's it.
But this is an everlasting law. You are not to break any bone of it. Give us another precept.
John 19.
Turn to John chapter 19, verses 1 through 37. Yahuwah chapter 19, verses 1 through 37. The Passover is not simply about partaking of a roasted lamb, a meal, bitter herbs, and unleavened bread. The Passover, you're getting the meat of the Torah. The meat of the Torah. It is not some social gathering. You are partaking of the lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. You are partaking of the living bread, the bread of life, the living bread. You are partaking of his flesh and drinking of his blood. Eating the living bread, the bread of life, which is Ruach. And it is the Ruach that brings us into covenant with him. The Passover is all about the renewing of the everlasting covenant, the covenant alluding to marriage. So thus, when we partake of him, when we take and eat and partake of his Ruach, and his Ruach enters us as a man enters a woman, more specifically as a man enters a virgin. When he enters a virgin who has never known a man, when he enters her, there is a circumcision, there is a split. When the hymen is broken and she bleeds, thus there is the blood of a covenant, the blood of a covenant between husband and wife. Blood always seals the covenant. It always seals covenant. And because she bleeds, she dies. She indeed dies to herself. She dies to her own will and her own desire. In the same way, when Ruach enters us, as a man enters a woman, he circumcises our hearts in the same way a virgin is circumcised. And we die to ourselves. We die to our own will and our own desire. And we enter into a renewed marriage covenant with him. And he shed his dam, his blood, in order to renew the everlasting covenant with mankind. And so you dare not partake of him who is kadosh and precious and righteous with uncleanness upon you, being defiled for the souls of the undead, wicked Ruach, wicked Shadayim. You dare not partake of him. He is not winking anymore. Do not rebel against his voice. It would be better if you did not partake of the Passover than to partake of it with uncleanness upon you and be cut off from his people. This is not about a social gathering or a party or partaking of a physical meal. This is the Torah that leads to everlasting life, that leads to the living bread, the bread that came down from Shamayim, the Ruach HaKadosh. If you partake of Passover and you don't partake of Ruach, you have not partaken of Passover. You've only partaken of a meal. Yahuwah in chapter 19, verses 1 through 37, beginning at what verse 1? Read, little one.
Then therefore Pilate took Yahushua and flogged him. And the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and placed it on his head. And they put a purple robe on him. And came to him and said, "Greetings, sovereign of the Yahudim." And they slapped him in the face. Do you hear? They slapped him in the face. They slapped our Passover lamb in the face. And you want to partake of him with uncleanness upon you? Destruction comes upon your head. He's not playing this year. Do not rebel against his voice. Come on, read, little one. And Pilate went outside again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no guilt in him." Then Yahushua came outside wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "See the man." So when the chief priests and officers saw him, they shouted, saying, "Impale, impale." Pilate said to them, "You take him and impale him, for I find no guilt in him." The Yahudim answered, "We have a law, and according to our law he ought to die.
Listen.
For he has made himself the son of Elohim." So when Pilate heard this word, he was more afraid, and went back into the palace and asked Yahushua, "Who are you from? Where are you from?" But Yahushua gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I possess authority to impale you, and I possess authority to release you?" Yahushua answered, "You would possess no authority against me if it were not given you from above. Because of this, he who delivered me to you has greater sin." From then on, Pilate was seeking to release him. But the Yahudim shouted, saying, "If you release this one, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a sovereign does speak against Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Yahushua out and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation day of the Pesach week.
Hear him. Listen, it was the preparation day of the Pesach. There is always a preparation day before a Shabbat. The next day here was the first day of unleavened bread, which always follows Pesach. This is the day of Pesach. He came in the volume of the book and offered himself as our Pesach lamb, our Passover lamb. He came in the volume of the book and offered himself on behalf of our sins and of our crimes. He is our Pesach lamb. It is he who we are partaking of. And you dare not partake of him with uncleanness upon you. Read.
And about the 6th hour, and he said to the Yahudim, "See your sovereign." But they shouted, "Away, away, impale him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I impale your sovereign?" The chief priests answered, "We have no sovereign except Caesar." At that time then he delivered him to them to be impaled. And they took Yahushua and led him away. And bearing his stake, he went out to the so-called place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they impaled him, and 2 others with him, one on this side and one on that side, and Yahushua in the middle. And Pilate wrote a title too, and put it on the stake. And it was written, "Yahushua of Nazareth, the sovereign of the Yahudim." Many of the Yahudim therefore read this title, for the place where Yahushua was impaled was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Greek, in Roman. So the chief priest of the Yahudim said to Pilate, "Do not write the sovereign of the Yahudim." But he said, "I am the sovereign of the Yahudim." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Then the soldier, when they had impaled Yahushua, took his outer garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and the inner garment. But the inner garment was without seam, woven from the top in one piece.
Do you hear? He was naked. He was stripped naked. Our husband was stripped naked in order to bear our nakedness, to bear our shame, in order to cover our shame. Our husband hung there naked, suffering as our Pesach lamb. Don't you dare partake of him with uncleanness upon you, being defiled for the souls of the dead. Demonic ruakut. Come on, read.
So they said to each other, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be, in order that the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." The soldiers therefore indeed did this. And by the stake of Yahushua stood his mother, and his mother's sister Mariam, the wife of Caiaphas, and Mariam from Magdala. Then Yahushua, seeing his mother and the taught one, whom he loved, standing by, he said to his mother, "Woman, see your son." Then to the taught one he said, "See your mother." And from that hour the taught one took her to his own home. After this, Yahushua, knowing that all had been accomplished, in order that the scripture might be accomplished, said, "I thirst." A bowl of sour wine stood there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop and held it to his mouth. So when Yahushua took the sour wine, he said, "It has been accomplished." And bowing his head, he gave up his ruach. Therefore, since it was the preparation day.
Therefore, since it was the preparation day, the day before the first day of unleavened bread, a high Shabbat, this was Passover. He came in the volume of the book and offered himself as our Passover lamb. Read.
That the body should not remain on the stake on the Shabbat, for that Shabbat was a high one. The Yahudim asked Pilate to have their legs broken, that they be taken away.
Listen.
Therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the others who was impaled with him. But when they came to Yahushua and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and instantly blood and water came out.
The cleansing blood of blood and water. The broken neck of a dove held over a bucket with running water to cleanse from uncleanness. Read.
And he who has seen has witnessed, and his witness is true. And he knows that he is speaking the truth, in order that you might believe. For this took place in order for the scripture to be filled.
Read.
Not one of his bones shall be broken.
Not one of his bones shall be broken.
And again another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they pierced.
They shall look on him whom they have pierced. In accordance in the volume of the book, as the Passover lamb, as the bones shall not be broken. Coming in the volume of the book as our Passover lamb, our Passover lamb, not one of his bones were broken. Being offered on the day of Passover, on the day of Passover as our Passover lamb. He is our living bread. The Torah points towards him. The Torah points towards salvation. Yahushua, the name meaning Yahuwah, is salvation. It points towards him. It points towards the living bread. It points towards Ruach. It points towards our Passover lamb. It points towards life. It points towards the renewing of the everlasting covenant. It points towards him. You cannot partake of him with uncleanness upon you. You cannot. You've done it in the past. You've done so. You've done so. You cannot do so this year. This is a renewed season, and you cannot, with the being defiled for the souls of the dead. Do not rebel against his word. Give us another precept.
Numbers 28, 1 through 6.
Numbers 28, 1 through 6. Numbers 28, 1 through 6. Numbers 28, 1 through 6. How are we looking for time?
132.
Bamidbar 28, 1 through 6. Thank you, Master. Bamidbar 28, 1 through 6. Beginning at verse 1. Here, read, little one.
And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying,
Read.
Command the children of Yasharal, and you shall say to them, Take heed to bring my offerings.
Take heed to bring my offerings.
My food for my offering.
My food for my offerings.
Made by fire as a sweet fragrance to me.
My food by fire made as a sweet fragrance to me. Read.
At their appointed time.
At their appointed times.
And you shall say to them.
And you shall say to them.
This is the offering made by fire.
This is the offering made by fire.
Which you bring to Yahuwah.
Which you bring to Yahuwah.
2 male lambs.
2 male lambs.
A year old.
A year old.
Perfect one.
Perfect one, representing the lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. Read.
Daily.
Daily.
A continual ascending offering.
A continual ascending offering.
The one lamb you prepare in the morning.
The one lamb you prepare in the morning.
And the other lamb you prepare between the evenings.
And the other lamb you prepare between the evenings. Read.
With 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain.
With 1/10 of an ephah of flour as a grain offering. Read.
Offering mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil. A continual ascending offering, which was offered at Mount Sinai for a sweet fragrance, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah.
The master calls here in the wilderness for an offering, his food at the appointed times, to bring a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the evening, the time of the morning offering and the time of the evening offering. The time of the morning offering based upon a 12-hour scriptural day. The time of the morning offering, the third hour, being 9 a.m. and the time of the evening offering being 3 p.m. Bring me my food at the appointed time daily. Read, little one.
We have Matthew 15, verse 25.
Matthew chapter 15,
Verse 25.
Verse 25. Matthew chapter 15, verse 25. Bring me my food at the appointed time as a continual ascending offering unto me. Our master hung as an ascending offering on our behalf, a whole burnt offering on our behalf. For because of the sin of Adam and Kuah, it was required that death entered the world. For in the day that you partake of this tree is the day that you shall surely die. As they partake of the fruit of that tree, rather, death entered into the world. The requirement for an ascending offering, the requirement for an ascending offering was made. The ascending offering, or the whole burnt offering, represents the whole consummation of sin. It represents sin being wholly destroyed. And this was pronounced upon you and I. And we were called to be and are called to be ascending offerings, whole burnt offerings, so that the whole consummation of sin will be completed in us. He came as us and offered himself in accordance with the Torah as an ascending offering on our behalf. A whole burnt offering on our behalf, representing the whole consummation of sin, representing death, meaning representing all of us being destroyed, being killed, being eternally destroyed, the whole consummation of sin, both now and forever, the whole consummation of sin. And thus he died and was raised to life in the spirit and went to hell, thus accomplishing the work, thus accomplishing the need for an ascending offering, thus accomplishing the need for our death. But yet we still must become an ascending offering with him, because there is still sin in the body, and the sin in the body must be consumed, and we must become an ascending offering with him. The third hour and the ninth hour here, Numbers 28, Matthew chapter 15, verse 25. Mark chapter 15.
Verse 25.
Mark chapter 15, verse 25. Mark chapter 15. Marcos chapter 15, verse 25. Marcos chapter 15, verse 25. Beginning at verse 25, read, little one.
And it was the third hour, and they impaled him.
It was the third hour, the time of the morning offering, in accordance with the Torah. He came in the volume of the book. The third hour, the time of the morning offering, that they impaled him. Read.
Jumping down to verse 33 to 35.
Now jumping down to verses 33 through 35. Mark 15, 33 through 35. Mark 15, verses 33 through 35. Read, little one.
And when the sixth hour came.
And when the sixth hour came.
Darkness came over all the land until the ninth hour.
Darkness came over all the land until the ninth hour, because he came in the volume of the book as our Passover lamb. The Passover lamb is slain at night. It is slain at night because it is slain to deliver us from death. Darkness representing death. It is slain to deliver us from sin and bondage and the land of Egypt, and to bring us into his marvelous light. The whole earth went dark, representing the whole earth is Egypt. He came to deliver the whole earth from the power of darkness, from Egypt, from Pharaoh, from the kingdom of darkness, and to deliver us into his marvelous light. He came in the volume of the book. At the sixth hour, read, to the ninth hour, the whole earth went dark, and at the ninth hour.
And at the ninth hour, Yahushua cried out with a loud voice, saying, Ali, Ali, lama sabachthani, which is translated, my all, why have you forsaken me? And some of those standing by, when they heard it, said, see, he is calling for Eliyahu.
Rock Yahuwah. He came in the volume of the book. You're not partaking of a roasted lamb. You're partaking of life. He was impaled at the time of the morning offering. At the sixth hour, hear him, at the sixth hour, the whole earth went dark. As at the sixth hour in Mitzrayim, the death messenger came. Destruction, the destroyer came at the sixth hour at midnight. At the sixth hour, there was a cry that went out as all of Egypt, the firstborn of all of Egypt, it's both man and beast, they died. The 6th hour, when it was night, the destroyer came, the death angel came. And the 6th hour of the day, to simulate the Torah, the whole earth went dark. To simulate the Passover, to simulate at midnight the deliverance that came forth at midnight. And so from midnight, the 6th hour, the whole earth went dark, showing that he came in the volume of the book to deliver us from darkness to light. And at the 9th hour, at the time of the evening offering, he gave up his ruach. He gave up his life for us. This is who we're partaking of. This is who the Torah points towards. The Torah points towards salvation. The Torah leads us to deliverance. The Torah leads us to the living bread. The Torah leads us to Yahushua HaMashiach, to the renewing of the covenant. The Torah should lead us, and is supposed to lead us to the Ruach HaKadosh, which is life. The only alternative is death. It's the serpent. It's death himself. This is the only other alternative. You're not partaking of a simple roasted lamb. You're partaking of him. And you dare not partake of him with uncleanness upon you. Read.
Daniel 6.
Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. Now we initially read there in Numbers chapter 28, verses 1 through 6. It called for 2 offerings, morning and evening. But we just read here in the book of Mark that 3 times were highlighted, the 3rd hour and the 6th hour and the 9th hour. This in the book of Daniel chapter 6, verse 10 is a foreshadowing of the Hamashiach's execution of his impalement. It is a foreshadowing of those hours of his impalement when he hung the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th hour. Read, little one. Daniel 6, verse 10.
And Daniel, when he knew that the writing was signed, went home, and in his upper room with his window open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his Allah as he had done before. Rak Yahuwah.
So we are to be an ascending offering with him. We, in accordance with the Torah, an ascending offering is required, and we are to hang on the stake with him. We are to bear up our stake of suffering daily, and we are to be a continual ascending offering unto him. We are to bring forth offerings at these hours, the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th hour, the time of the morning offering at midday, which is symbolic of midnight when the death messenger came, and at evening, the 9th hour at 3 p.m., 9 a.m., 12 p.m., and 3 p.m. We are to be an ascending offering with him, a continual ascending offering with him. But in accordance with the Torah, only a pure, undefiled offering will be accepted. And so we cannot even bring him his offerings. We've gone over this with uncleanness upon us. We must be clean. We must be clean. You cannot partake of the offerings. You cannot bring him his offerings. If they are defiled and defective, we must be pure. We must be clean. And so in order to take of the Passover, which is an offering, we must be pure and clean and in accordance with the Torah. If we are defiled and unclean when we partake of him, he's going to cut us off. He's going to cut us off. We are partaking of life, of Ruach, and he will not come if there is uncleanness upon you. In this season, he has declared, if you partake of him, if you partake of the Passover, the destroyer comes. The destroyer comes. It is not a social gathering. It is not a dinner. It is not a party. We are partaking of life. It is the renewal of the everlasting covenant between Yahuwah and man, in which none of us can partake of with uncleanness, being defiled for the beings of the dead. Come on, read.
Daniel 9:27.
Daniel 9:27. Daniel 9:27. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. He came in the volume of the book. In the volume of the book. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. Read verse 27.
And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of the week he shall put an end to slaughtering and meal offering.
Mm-hmm.
And on the wing of abominations he shall lay waste,
mm-hmm.
even until the complete end, and that which is decreed is poured out on the one who lays waste.
This is the impalement of our master. He was impaled in the middle of the week. Yes, he was. He was impaled in the middle of the week, and he stopped the grain offerings and the meal offerings and the animal slaughterings. His death stopped that when he came as our Passover lamb, offered in the middle of the week. This is why Passover, Pasach, hear him, Pasach must always be celebrated in the middle of the week. He wasn't slaughtered on a 5th day. He wasn't slaughtered on a 3rd day. He was slaughtered on the 4th day of the week. And if you are partaking of his right calendar, of his fixed Chanukian calendar, then Pasach will always fall on the 4th day of the week. As it reads here, he was slaughtered on the 4th day of the week, and we must celebrate Pasach on the 4th day of the week as he has prescribed. Any other day is an abominable day. Any other day is the wrong day. He came in the volume of the book. In the volume of the book. And so we must follow the volume of the book and celebrate Pasach on the 4th day and partake of him. And partake of him. Pasach in this season is being celebrated on many days. And they are wrong. They are abominable days. He was slaughtered on the 4th day of the week and not any other day. And if it doesn't occur on the 4th day of the week, year after year after year, it is wrong. It is wrong. Nevertheless, he came in the volume of the book as our Passover lamb, and we are partaking of him. The Torah points towards him. The Torah points towards life, the living bread, the children's bread, the Ruach HaKadosh. It points towards him. It points towards the renewing of the everlasting marriage covenant. We are partaking of him. And if you partake of him this year, after having heard his words, with unclean hands, your blood is on your own head. Your blood falls on your own head. It does not fall on mine. You have heard, and now you are responsible for what you have heard. Read, little one.
Isaiah 49:8.
Isaiah 49:8. We're going to call the verses and we're going to move on. Isaiah, Yeshayahu 49:8. Isaiah, Yeshayahu chapter 49. Verse 8, beginning at verse 8. Read, little one.
Thus said Yahuwah.
Thus says Yahuwah.
In a favorable time I shall answer you.
In a favorable time I shall answer you.
And in the day of deliverance I shall help you.
In a day of deliverance I shall help you.
And I guard you and give you for a covenant of the people.
And I guard you and give you for a covenant to the people.
To restore the earth.
To restore the earth.
To cause them to inherit the ruined inheritances.
To cause them to inherit the ruined inheritances. Barak Yahuwah. So he was given as a covenant. Do you understand? He was given for the renewing of the everlasting marriage covenant. To partake of him is to partake of covenant. To partake of him is to partake of marriage. To partake of him is to partake of life. To partake of him means that he enters us as a man enters a woman, a virgin, and circumcises the heart as the hymen is split and a circumcision goes forth in her. And we enter into the bond of covenant with him. Pasach is a partaking of the Pasach. It's about the renewing of the everlasting covenant. It is about the covenant of life, not one of flesh, but of Ruach. Not one of the bondwoman, but of the free woman, born of the Jerusalem above. It is a covenant of life, of Ruach. It is the Ruach that gives life. The flesh profits nothing. To truly partake of Pasach is to partake of him, our Pasach lamb. It is to partake of covenant, of marriage. But you cannot partake of marriage or covenant with him if you're still married. You are defiled for the beings, the souls of the dead, because you spread your legs under every green tree and on every high hill. And in accordance with the Torah, the unclean thing must be cast out. It must be given a certificate of divorce and sent away and cast out. Only then can you partake of the renewed covenant, the renewed marriage covenant with him, and receive of Ruach, receive of life, receive of the living bread, and partake of the Pasach. Until then, you're dead and you're unclean, and you cannot partake of him. Come on.
Matthew 26, verse 26 to 29.
Matthew chapter 26. What verses?
26 to 29.
Verses 26 to 29. Matthew 26, 26 to 29. Matthew 26, 26 to 29. Beginning at verse 26, read.
And as they were eating, Yahushua took bread.
Listen, and as they were eating, Yahushua took bread.
And having blessed, broke, and gave it to the taught ones and said.
And having blessed, broke it, and gave it to the taught ones, saying.
Take, eat.
Take and eat.
This is my body.
This is my body.
And taking the cup and giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you.
Drink from it, all of you.
For this is my blood.
This is my blood.
That of the renewed covenant.
That of the renewed covenant.
Which is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins.
Which is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins.
But I say to you, I shall certainly not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on till that day when I drink it anew with you in the reign of my Father.
Take and eat. Take and eat. This dinner happened the night before Passover. It happened the night before Passover. But he's showing here in this shadow that he came in the volume of the book as our Passover lamb, as the living bread that came down from Shamayim. Take and eat. This is his body broken for us. The body of the Passover lamb, the body of our Mashiach. This is who you're partaking of. This is the renewing of the everlasting covenant. Here, drink of the cup unless you eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. You have no life in you. The blood of grapes poured upon the ground. Wine. The blood of grapes poured upon the ground. Drink. This represents his blood. This represents Ruach. The bread represents Ruach. The living bread represents Ruach. It represents his broken body. The broken body of our Passover lamb. The blood is the blood given for the renewing of the everlasting covenant. To partake of him is to partake of marriage. It is to partake of covenant. It is to partake of life. It is to partake of the living bread that gives life, the Ruach HaKadosh. The only other alternative is death. Hasatan, the serpent who is waiting to sting you as our ancestors were stung in the wilderness. But you must be clean. You must not partake of it unworthily, lest you be cut off. As Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, I believe, around the 12th or 14th chapter, I believe. Perhaps I'm wrong. It is written, for those who had partaken of his body and his blood unworthily, for this reason some of them were sick. Some of them were dead, and some of them were sick, and some of them were dead. And this is Torah. If we partake of his offerings unworthily, we will be cut off from his people. We cannot partake of him unworthily. We cannot partake of him with uncleanness upon us. We must ensure that he has cleansed us before he renews his covenant in us. Pesach is about the renewing of the covenant in which the Torah, the light of the Torah, lights our path and leads us to the bread of life. It leads us to salvation. It leads us to deliverance. It leads us to him. Our Pesach, it leads us to the wine, the blood of the renewed covenant. It leads us to him. And we cannot partake of him in a renewed marriage until the old husbands have been first divorced. Come on, give us another precept.
Isaiah 55, 1 through 3.
Isaiah 55, verses 1 through 3. Isaiah 55, verses 1 through 3. Ishayahu 55, verses 1 through 3. Listen, beginning at verse 1, read.
Oh, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters.
Everyone who thirsts, come to the living waters. Read.
And you who have no silver, come buy and eat.
And you who have no silver, come buy and eat.
Come buy wine and milk without silver and
come
without price.
And buy wine and milk without silver and without price.
Why do you weigh out silver for what is not bread?
Why do you weigh out silver for what is not bread?
And your labor for what does not satisfy.
And your labor for what does not satisfy.
Listen to me.
Listen to me.
And eat what is good.
And eat what is good.
And let your being delight itself in fatness.
And let your being delight itself in fatness.
Incline your ear and come to me.
Incline your ear and come to me.
Hear so that your being lives.
Hear so that your being lives.
And let me make an everlasting covenant with you.
And let me make an everlasting covenant with you.
The trustworthy, loving commitments of Dawood.
The trustworthy, loving commitment of Dawood. Take and eat. Take and eat. You may not have another opportunity to take and eat. Yahuwah's distress, death is at the door. Choose life. Take and eat, but be cleansed so that you can take and eat. Take and eat of the living bread. Drink of the living water. Take of the Ruach HaKadosh. For he alone gives life. He alone brings deliverance. The flesh profits nothing. This is what it means to partake of the Passover. To partake of life. To have the everlasting covenant renewed in us. The everlasting marriage covenant renewed in us. But as a bride must be clean. As a bride must be clean. Even one who has been married before, there must have been a divorce before she can be married, be remarried. We must be cleansed. Go to the threshing floor. Stay there if need be. Hold on and do not let go until he blesses you. Stay at that place, the threshing floor, where a consuming fire will separate the wheat from the chaff, will gather the wheat into the barn and separate the chaff to be burned. Hear his voice and obey his instructions. Your lives depend on it. Take and eat and choose life. And choose life. You make the choice. Life and death is presented before you this day. And Shamanee and earth is bearing witness against you. Choose life. Choose the living bread that come down from Shamayim and live. And live. Read, little one.
Matthew 7, 21 to 23.
Matthew 7, verse 21 through 23. Matthew 7, verse 21 through 23. Matthew 7, verse 21 through 23. Beginning at verse 21, read, little one.
Not everyone who says to me, Master, Master.
Not everyone who says to me, Master, Master.
Shall enter into the reign of the heavens.
Shall enter into the reign of Shamayim.
But he who is doing the desire of my Father in the heavens.
But he who was doing the desire of my Father who is in Shamayim.
Many shall say to me in that day.
Many shall say unto me in that day.
Master, Master.
Master, Master.
Have we not prophesied in your name?
Have we not prophesied in your name?
And cast out demons in your name.
And cast out demons in your name.
And done many mighty works in your name.
And done many mighty works in your name.
And then I shall declare to them.
Hear him. And then I shall declare unto them.
I never knew you.
I never knew you.
Depart from me.
Depart from me.
You who work lawlessness.
You who work lawlessness. The Torah doesn't make you righteous. Hear him. The Torah does not make us righteous. The Torah is there to lead us to righteousness. The living bread, Yahuwah Zadakanu, whom when he enters into covenant with us, he, as the Torah declares, gives instruction to a husband to provide food, clothing, and marital rights to her. When we enter into covenant with him and he becomes our husband, when he enters us, as a man enters a woman and we become his bride, he then clothes us in his righteousness. He clothes us in his righteousness. Here he says, depart from me, I never knew you. You who practice lawlessness. You've heard this before, but it bears hearing again. This is a Hebrew idiom. This is a Hebrew idiom. He never knew. In other words, he never knew you as a man knows a woman. As in the 4th chapter of Genesis, Bereshith, Adam knew Kuah, and she conceived and bore Cain. He never knew you. He never entered you. He has never become your wife. The covenant has never been renewed in you. He never knew you. He never became your Passover. You never partook of the living bread. You rejected it. You rejected it, and the only alternative is depart from me. Enter into death. This is the only alternative. If you don't allow him to know you as a man knows a woman, to enter you, to circumcise your heart, to enter into a renewed everlasting covenant with you, by you partaking of his flesh, drinking of his blood, eating the bread that came down from Shamayim, partaking of Ruach, but first being cleansed. If you do not partake of him, the only unforgivable sin is rejecting the Ruach HaKadosh. This is what it means to blaspheme him, to reject him unto death, to reject him. This is the only unforgivable, unpardonable sin, is to reject the Ruach HaKadosh, to reject him. The only alternative to rejecting life is death. The serpent awaits. He's coming soon. He's coming soon to manifest in flesh, and he's going to govern and rule this earth for 42.5 months. Only 144,000 worldwide having the seal of the living Elohim, who have partaken of the Passover, who have partaken of the living bread. Only these will be saved from the hour of trial that is soon to come upon the earth. This Passover is unlike any other you have known. He is doing an even greater separation, separating the clean from the unclean, separating the righteous from the unrighteous, separating the living from the dead, separating the living from the dead. Give us this last precept, little one.
Matthew 5, verse 6.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Matthew chapter 5, verse 6. Beginning at verse 6. Read, little one.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness.
Blessed are those, Baruch are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness.
Because they shall be filled.
Because they shall be filled. You must be hungry. You must be cleansed. And you must be hungry. As though a man who hadn't eaten in 4 weeks, a man who hadn't had a drink of water in 3 weeks, if he doesn't get food, he's going to die. If he doesn't get water, he's going to die. This hunger now, I pray you have the understanding now. We're talking about the living bread here. You must hunger for the living bread. You must hunger. You must be desperate. You must be in a state of desperation that you've never experienced before. But you must be first cleansed. And if you are desperate for the living bread, he will feed you without cost, and he will feed you without limit. You will have no omas. There will be no limit to each household. You can eat without cost, and you can eat as much as you want. If you come hungrily, with a hunger unlike you've ever known. And you must thirst for the living water of the Ruach HaKadosh. The living water that comes in and power washes our inner parts. That cleanses our inner parts. The living water that rushes up into everlasting life. The living water of the Ruach HaKadosh. You must thirst for him unlike you've ever thirsted before. You must be desperate for him. But you must first be cleansed. This is what it means to partake of the Passover. To eat the living bread. To drink of the living water. To enter into everlasting life. To have the everlasting covenant renewed in you. But you must first be cleansed and divorced from the wicked ruach, the souls of the dead or whatever unclean thing is on you. So that you can partake of him without limit. Without limit. He desires to give himself to you. He desires to pour out himself unto you. He desires it. He's been crying out to you for as long as he's been pleading through his servant. And he desires to give unto them who hunger and thirst. This Passover is unlike any other. Do not rebel against his word. Do not take it lightly. And if you are those who are cleansed, come there hungering and thirsting for him, not for physical food, not for fellowship, not for some social gathering, but come hungering for him, to be filled more with him. And for those that have never known him, come hungering and thirsting for him if you're cleansed, and he will fill you. He will fill you and renew his everlasting covenant with you. Go to the threshing floor, the place where one goes to find her kinsman redeemer, the place where the wheat is threshed and separated into the barn, the place where the wheat is separated from the chaff, where a consuming fire thoroughly cleanses the threshing floor to separate his wheat into the barn and the chaff to be burned. Repent from all unclean works. Seek him to reveal any unclean matter that dwells in you. Confess it to him. Confess it to him. Own up to it. Confess it to him. And ensure him that he is right, because he is right. Confess it to him and ask him to remove it from you. Repent from every unclean work and be immersed in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach for the forgiveness of sin. Receive the cleansing water of the red heifer, the waters given for purification from sin. Be cleansed of him. Be washed of your leprosy and your menstrual cycle. Be washed of your running sores. Be washed of the dead beings, the souls of the dead that you have lain with under every green tree. Be washed of them. Be impaled with him and die with him and be buried with him. And thus having the penalty of death that was pronounced over all mankind paid in you through belief in him. Be resurrected to the newness of life. And if you truly hunger, and if you truly come to him with a broken and contrite heart, and if you have truly repented, he will fill you. He will fill you. He will fill you. And he will renew his everlasting covenant with you. Take and eat. Take and eat. You may not have another opportunity to take and eat. Yahuwah's distress is at the door. 144,000 are going to be sealed, after which he will seal no other. Take and eat, but do not attempt to take and eat with uncleanness upon you. Thank you, Master, for your word that you've poured out to your people. I pray that you have given them eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to understand what thus says Yahuwah to his people in this season. I pray that not one word will fall void to the earth, but that it will go forth and do what you have sent it forth to do. I pray that not one word, one seed has been cast this day by the wayside. That not one seed has been cast on shallow ground. That not one seed has been cast amongst thorns. But that this word, as your word has gone across the earth as a hammer that shatters this day, has broken up the hardened soil of the heart this day, making the soil fertilized and conducive for the planting of seed, the seed of life, such that the living water will come and water that seed and cause it to conceive life and cause it to sprout forth from the soil, to sprout forth and to grow into a mighty tree, producing the fruit that leads to everlasting life. This is my prayer in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, my master, my Passover lamb, my living bread, my living water, my portion and my strength. This is my prayer in his name. So be it, so be it, so be it. To those of you who are on YouTube, once again, we are grateful that you stopped by to hear what thus says Yahuwah to his people this day and in this season. We pray that your Ruachs have been stirred, and that you're even now going to hearken to his instructions and not reject the bread of life. The only alternative is death, and he desires to give you life. Until the next time that we meet, Yahuwah barak you and guard you. Yahuwah make his face shine upon you and show favor unto you. Yahuwah lift up his face upon you and give you shalom. Thus you shall put my name on the children of Yasharal, and I myself shall barak them. So be it, so be it, so be it. Shalom.